Alright, let's talk about our friends over in Saudi Arabia and this whole oil production saga. You know, the kingdom's been playing this game of will they, won't they with their oil taps, and it's got everyone from Wall Street to your local gas station clerk scratching their heads. First off, let's remember that Saudi Arabia sits on an ocean of oil. They've got reserves that would make anyone else green with envy. And for the longest time, they've used that to their advantage, calling the shots in OPEC and swaying global oil prices like they're playing with a thermostat. But lately, they've been pulling back on production. Why? Well, global demand took a nosedive, thanks pandemic, and prices weren't exactly making them dance with joy. So, they teamed up with their OPEC Plus buddies, did some coordinated production cuts, and tried to keep prices from tanking completely. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The world isn't standing still. You've got sanctions on Russian oil because of the whole Ukraine situation, and Europe's scrambling to find new suppliers. You'd think Saudi Arabia would jump at the chance to fill that gap, right? But they've been cautious, maybe a bit too cozy with Russia in OPEC Plus, not wanting to rock the boat, or the oil tanker in this case. Meanwhile, the global energy transition is chugging along like a train with a broken wheel. Sure, everyone's talking about renewables, electric cars, and hugging trees. But let's be real. The world still runs on oil, especially in places like India and Southeast Asia, where economies are booming, and they need energy, lots of it. Saudi Arabia knows this. They've got their Vision 2030 thing going on, trying to diversify their economy, but that costs money, a ton of it. And where does that money come from? Oil revenues. They need oil prices to be high enough to fund their grand plans, but not so high that it kills demand or encourages competitors. Then there's the wild card of potential conflicts in the Middle East. Never a dull moment there. If things heat up between Israel and Iran, or if the Houthis keep causing trouble in Yemen, oil supply routes could get messy. That would spike demand for reliable suppliers, and guess who's perfectly positioned to step in? Yep, Saudi Arabia. But let's not forget about US shale producers. Those guys can ramp up production faster than you can say hydraulic fracturing, and they've been a thorn in OPEC's side for a while. Saudi Arabia can't just open the floodgates without considering the ripple effects. So, what's the kingdom's move? They're planning to boost their production capacity to 13 million barrels per day by 2028. That's not just for fun. They're gearing up to grab a bigger slice of the pie. They see the writing on the wall. Despite all the talk of green energy, global oil demand isn't disappearing overnight. Emerging markets are hungry, the petrochemical industry is booming, and the aviation sector is shaking off its pandemic blues. In the grand scheme of things, Saudi Arabia is likely to crank up the oil pumps. Maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. They'll do it strategically, timing it to maximize their market share, while keeping prices at a sweet spot that funds their budget but doesn't undercut demand. So yeah, I'd bet around at the pub that we'll see Saudi Arabia increasing oil production down the line. They're too savvy and have too much at stake to sit on the sidelines while the world clamors for energy. Plus, they've got to keep up with their ambitious plans back home, and for that, they need the cash flow that only black gold can provide.